Welcome to Within the Frame, where we bring the most pressing issues across the globe into focus. I'm Kim Mok-yeon. South Korea has been shaken by one of its most devastating wildfires on record, with more than 480 square kilometers of forest affected and the flames even breaching national parks last week. Thankfully, the main fires had been largely contained as better visibility and cooler temperatures helped extinguishing efforts. The wildfire killed at least 30 people, injured 45, and forced some 3,600 people to flee. From the rugged ridges of Juwangsan to the protected slopes of Jirisan, even areas known for their biodiversity and cultural heritage weren't spared. In part one of Within the Frame tonight, we invite Yoon Hong-geun of the Sobaeksan National Park Nature Center to talk about the scale of destruction, the challenges in containing fires inside protected areas, and what measures are needed to prevent future disasters. Welcome to the program, Mr. Yoon.
Well, good evening.
So let's start right away. The recent wildfires has affected an unprecedentedly forest area of approximately 480 square kilometers, which is the largest on record, of course. The fires even spread into some national parks. Could you tell us what is the current damage situation and scale within the national parks?
Actually, there are 23 national parks in Korea, of which 2 were damaged. Jirisan Mountain, located in Sancheong County, and Juwangsan National Park, located in Cheongsong County. In Jirisan's case, about 135 hectares was burnt. And in the case of Juwangsan, it was a really serious situation, as more than 20%, which is about 2,400 hectares of the total park area, has been affected by this wildfire. For your information, over the last 10 years, the average size of wildfire in national parks was only 5 to 10 hectares. Then, just looking at the size of the wildfire this time, it is already the worst wildfire ever, uncomparable. But as you can imagine, in national parks, it takes much more time for the forest to return to its original state because it is in the maturity stage or close to primeval forest compared to the ordinary forest. So the damage is much greater than the size of the damaged area itself.
So that really sounds like a significant amount of damage, considering it even went into protected areas. Now, the spread of wildfires into national parks is concerning not only just because of the ecological damage, but also for the destruction of cultural and historical heritage. And you mentioned Jirisan and Juwangsan National Parks. Could you tell us what significance do these parks hold?
Starting with Jirisan National Park, since ancient times, Jirisan has been known as one of the 3 sacred mountains on the Korean peninsula. And when the national park system was introduced in Korea, it was designated as the first national park in 1967. In addition, it is the largest mountainous national park spanning 3 provinces and plays a role as a treasure trove of various ecosystems. Regarding the ecological importance, the Asiatic black bear restoration project has begun in this park, and more than 80 bears are currently living stably. This successful mammal restoration project has been widely known as best practice worldwide. Juwangsan Mountain is famous as one of the Korea's 3 major rocky mountains, along with Seoraksan and Wulchulsan. And in particular, the trekking course along Juwang Valley is a barrier-free trail. So anyone, including the elderly and children, can enjoy the gorge and canyon of Juwangsan Mountain. In addition, Daejeonsa Temple, located at the trailhead of the representative trail, serves as the landmark of Juwangsan National Park and is a historical temple built 1400 years ago during Silla Dynasty and stores several cultural assets, including national treasures.
Right, so a lot of history. Clearly, these sites really hold more than just natural value. Now, despite efforts by the National Park Service and also local governments to prevent the fires from crossing into park boundaries, the flames eventually spread inside. What were the main challenges in containing the fires within the national parks?
I think I can talk about 2 main factors. natural element and nationwide circumstance. First, the natural element was strong wind, dry weather, and high temperature, which provided better conditions to make the fire burn better. So the fire spread much faster and was difficult to control. In addition, rugged terrain made it difficult for firefighters to access, forcing them to slow down their work. The other one was the nationwide circumstance. Several wildfires occurred simultaneously across the country. Since the wildfire was such a big scale, only dealing with manpower was impossible to contain the fire. Helicopters had to be used to catch the main fire. However, to cover all the wildfires throughout the country, limited number of helicopters were deployed sporadically. So a small number of helicopters at a place were hostile to suppressing the large wildfires in Juwangsan and Jirisan last week.
Right, so managing these fires in such terrain does appear very complex. Now, while taking lessons from these recent wildfire, what kind of support do you think the government should provide in the future for wildfires and other disasters?
Large-scale natural disasters like the wildfire this time are quite difficult to control with human power if they occur. Therefore, I think preventing before is the best measure. For this, I can talk about two things. First of all, I think it is necessary to strengthen national level campaigns and educational activities in order to raise the level of safety awareness of the people. Despite the ongoing wildfire in Jirisan Mountain this time, some hikers asked the National Park Office if it was possible to go multi-day hikes, staying overnight up the mountain. Also, there are still paddy burnings and garbage burning activities all over the countries. These are examples of the level of safety awareness that is still lacking. Second, the number of national park staff, considering the whole size of the park, is quite poor. Therefore, simple visual patrolling with bare eye is not enough to achieve its purpose. Then preventive activities using high-tech equipment such as smoke detectors, drones, and real-time cams are essential. Budget support for this purpose should be strengthened at the central government level.
Right, so raising public safety awareness and also possibly providing necessary equipment to prevent these disasters from happening would be definitely helpful. Now, national parks actually implement various preventative measures, we are aware, against these disasters like wildfires. Now, especially in spring, there are trail closures in place to reduce fire risks. How effective has these measures been in preventing the wildfires, and what does this imply?
National parks operate trail closure policy to prevent forest fires in spring and autumn respectively, which are the driest period of the year. In fact, since most wildfires are caused by human activities, trail closures in some routes has become an indispensable system during such a high risk of wildfire. Many hikers sympathize with the system, which is necessary for wildfire prevention and nature conservation, despite the inconvenience of restricting these hiking trails. In other words, there is also an effect of raising the awareness of the importance of wildfire prevention for the public. As a result of this, even though the forests of wild national parks account for more than 7% of the total forest in Korea, every year, when thousands of wildfires occur across the country, fewer than 10 wildfires happen within national park. This is significantly lower frequency than the average.
Despite so, preventative measures are still more necessary, though they're already in place. But now the key would be real-world effectiveness, how it would be effective in preparing for future disasters of this kind. Mr. Yoon, thank you so much for sharing your expertise and experience with us tonight. We appreciate it.
Thanks for inviting me.
Now, wildfires are not only a challenge for South Korea. From Japan to California, massive blazes are tearing through forests at alarming speeds, and experts are pointing to climate change, forest composition, and delayed response systems as key drivers. Now, in part two of Within the Frame, we turn to David Bowman, wildfire expert and professor at the University of Tasmania in Australia, to break down why these fires are spreading faster, burning hotter, and becoming harder to stop. Good morning, good evening. Thank you for joining us, Professor Bowman.
Yeah, thank you. Pleasure to be able to contribute to a serious problem.
Our pleasure. Now, so let's delve in right away. Recently, wildfires have been occurring not only in Korea, but also in Japan and California. Professor, what is the cause of this global trend? And do you agree with some climate experts who believe it's because of global warming?
Yeah, look, we're getting a much better understanding of what I'm calling the global fire crisis. It stands to reason that we're seeing more extreme wildfire behaviour around the world for the simple reason that air temperatures are warmer, fire seasons are lengthening, and fuel types are drying out. In fact, one of the signals of a global fire crisis is fire in places you wouldn't expect fire. We're seeing that all over the world, places that would be traditionally just not a wildfire hotspot. You know, for instance, the United Kingdom is now taking wildfire seriously. You don't think of the UK as a place like California where you would have house loss from wildfires. And another, I think, red flag, and that's certainly why the Korean situation is interesting, is when you're having historical structures being destroyed. They are a very good record that, you know, over 1,000 years, these places have been safe, and something is changing. Certainly one of the factors that is changing is climate. There are other factors, of course, that we need to consider, particularly land use changes, the way people are using landscapes, maybe ceasing, believe it or not, traditional practices that might have been reducing the risk of fire as people move to cities. Often rural areas are less well maintained. So there's a lot of issues, but certainly climate change is certainly number one factor.
Right, environmental shifts definitely could contribute to that. Now, according to firefighting authorities, the wildfire in Uiseong spread at a speed of 8.2 kilometers per hour. For most of us who are unfamiliar, could you explain for us, how fast is that speed and what contributed to such a rapid speed?
Right, so one of the things that has been detected around the world is that fires have a really accelerating growth rate. They seem to be growing faster. One of the reasons is what we call rate of spread. So 8 kilometres an hour, you wouldn't be able to outrun that fire in a natural landscape. So, you know, it's a very fast moving fire, you know, walking speed's about 4 kilometres. So it's twice as fast as walking. So they're moving very fast. Why are they moving fast? A couple of reasons. Wind is certainly a number one reason that we're seeing what we call wind-driven fires more common. They can just absolutely overwhelm fire suppression effort because the fires being accelerated by these strong winds just rapidly blasting across landscapes. Certainly in hilly terrain, fire, we talk about fire running up hills, so it can accelerate. Makes sense. The flames are able to lean down on the ground, catching more fire in front of it. So, we talk about fire having a behaviour. Certainly, we talk about fire having these fire runs where you have explosive growth of fire. And once you go into these wind-driven fire events, certainly we saw in California, very concerningly, you can't use aviation to control the fires because you can get wind speeds that are so strong that it's no longer safe to be operating helicopters and aircraft, particularly in terrain where you get a lot more turbulence. So a combination of factors, but certainly a big climate factor and a big terrain factor.
Then, Professor, do you think the topography of South Korea's steep mountains and the predominance of pine trees over hardwoods also contribute to the rapid spread of the fire?
Oh, absolutely. You can see that in the footage you're showing, this steep terrain. Firefighting in steep terrain is really very, very difficult because the fires, as I said, they run up slopes, but it's extremely difficult for people to be on the ground. It's just, it doesn't look much, but when you, put a backpack on and try to walk around on a steep slope, everything is against you, particularly if you're trying to confront a fire that's moving quickly. So terrain is an enormously important factor. Another thing is that terrain can funnel wind down valleys. So you can get all sorts of strange behaviours. You can get what we talk about topographic steering of wind. So even there's been situations where firefighters have been killed because the fires can, even though they might think that they're safe weather conditions, the local terrain can set up a situation like a chimney where the fire can suddenly accelerate at extraordinary speeds, overwhelming people.
Right, so the mixture of wind and this forest type and geography also worsened the situation. Now, even though the main fire of this wildfire in South Korea has been contained, concerns about the reignition of the fire is remaining high. Professor, what are the methods for extinguishing the remaining embers to completely put out the fire?
So the mopping up operations are very time consuming. What firefighters do is that they seek to get a perimeter to contain the fire, and I understand that's occurred. And then they need to go and make certain that all of the active fires are put out. And that's slow work because you often, in the terrain, it'll be using helicopters and also people cutting fire breaks, fire trails and so on. And then there will be a point where there's no longer a risk of expansion, even if there are still some areas burning inside the fire area, there'll be no longer a risk that the fire will be able to spread. So that could take, it could take weeks, particularly in this hilly terrain. And, you've got a lot of fuel. It's another factor that we didn't mention is that before spring, you have a lot of leaf litter in the deciduous forests, and then the evergreen forests, the conifer forests, have a lot of litter bed, which may be very dry. So I would imagine the firefighting effort will be securing the perimeter and then going into the inside the fire ground and trying to find areas that are still burning and put those out. And I hope that they leave some unburnt islands because that will be very, very important wildlife refuge, because this is really these very large fires, intense fires, are very terrible for wildlife and, the rehabilitation, but particularly the larger animals need a habitat, they need a home. So we need some unburnt vegetation for them, and I hope that's preserved.
Right, so it sounds like full containment requires continued vigilance, and also efforts are needed to, preserve the ecosystem as well. Now, some of the reasons cited for the wildfire spread in Korea include a lack of centralized command, an aging firefighting workforce, and also a shortage of helicopters and other firefighting equipment. Since you're in Australia, how does Australia prepare for and respond to such wildfires?
So, it's an interesting question. The Australian approach is actually a little bit different to the American approach for a variety of reasons. We haven't relied so much on aviation and effectively a firefighting army. We do a lot more what's called fuel management. So we use our forests, eucalyptus forests, are very fire prone. We use where we can, adapting an Aboriginal approach actually of burning the vegetation under very mild conditions, and that reduces the fuel load and makes firefighting easier. We also have fire lines established in the landscape called fire breaks that we can use for firefighting operations. So the classical approach of just trying to put all fires out, stopping all fires, which was the American approach, has run into trouble because you end up with landscapes that are really very, very filled up with fuel, and that huge quantities of fuel will eventually burn, and when it burns, it often burns extremely intensely. One of the things that I would really suggest is, for scientists in Korea to do is to try to find out about traditional practices. It could be very interesting to know back maybe 1,000 years ago when people were living with forests, how were they managing them? Certainly we know even in Europe, people were using prescribed fire to reduce fuels. It helped them, find things like, forest foods. It often helped increase the abundance of wildflowers and wildlife and so on. And again, it's sort of thinking about using fire in a very controlled way to manage landscapes rather than just try to put a total prohibition on all fires and then fight them when you get an outbreak, because no matter how good your technology, your detecting systems, your firefighting army and your firefighting air force, as the American experience has shown, eventually under climate change, you will see fires escalate to a point where they become uncontrollable. And in the worst case, those fires will cross into urban areas and you will get mass destruction of infrastructure and housing as occurred in LA. So I'm certainly, the Australian approach is not just about firefighting, it's also about landscape management and fuel management, and something that probably is a very foreign idea for Korea, but might be an interesting thing for fire managers and also for scientists to explore and to think about.
Professor, thank you so much for the suggestion. It would definitely be of help to South Korean authorities as well. Now, we'll have to let you go. We're running out of time, but thank you so much for your time, your insights tonight. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. A pleasure. And I hope everything works out. We've got a big problem on our hands. We're all working together. So it's great to help. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, as the smoke largely cleared in South Korea, one question still remains. Are we ready for the next one? Because how we act now will decide what burns and what's protected tomorrow. Let's hope that from this disaster, we'll learn the lessons we need to face for what comes next. And that'll be all from us on Within the Frame. Be sure to tune in next time as we continue to explore the stories that matter. Until then, stay informed and engaged.